I mentioned in my previous video on Legends of Runeterra something called the Unholy Trinity. If you've never played Legends of Runeterra, you're probably wondering what I'm talking about, and if you do play Legends of Runeterra, you're probably having flashbacks to that time. So what exactly was the Unholy Trinity, and how did it affect Legends of Runeterra? Patch 2.7.0. It's the second part of the Shurima expansion. People are enjoying the game, playing with their new Ascended toys, and are excited with the 3 new champions they'll be getting. We were going to be getting the absolute bestest boy in Chip, Zilean was looking better than ever, and Irelia, one of Ionia's most iconic champions, was finally coming to the game and bringing with her a new exciting archetype. Who wouldn't be excited? So, Zilean and Malphite were obviously cool and all, but Irelia had a new archetype. Of course everyone was going to be trying her out. So Irelia's archetype, Blade Dance, made it so that when you played units or cast spells with the Blade Dance keyword, they would create these 1/1 units called blades that would automatically attack the enemy. An interesting ability, but one that had a lot of versatile applications. Some people tried making her work with Professor Von Yip, a card that buffed 1-cost units and was a meme at best. Some tried combining her with Misfortune with some degrees of success. Someone even tried combining her with Snapvines, which I thought was a novel use for her blades. However, the most successful pairing people found for Irelia was Azir. And that was when it all started to go wrong. Azir's kit is built around these units called Sand Soldiers. Basically, when any unit attacks, Azir creates a Sand Soldier to attack with them, a 1-cost 1/1 minion that dies when it deals an attack. He was most commonly played as an aggro champion and was somewhat decent, though not exactly powerful on his own. However, if he just had a tool that would allow him to attack multiple times in a single turn, Azir could be a force to be reckoned with. Say, what's that shiny new archetype over there? Irelia Azir was an absolute nightmare of a deck. Irelia's kit with all of its Blade Dance cards allowed her to synergize with Azir's Sand Soldier kit, allowing the player to barrage their enemies with waves of blades and sand soldiers that they could do nothing about. If you blocked them, your units would lose health and the Irelia Azir player would lose nothing, since the blade and sand soldiers also costed nothing. If you didn't block them, then you were just dead. As if that wasn't bad enough, since Irelia was a part of the Jackass region, she also had access to these 2 cards, Sparring Student and Greenglade Duo, 2 cards that got stronger the more units were summoned. And it just so happened that blades and sand soldiers are units. So now you had a deck that could attack with a speed nearly on par with an aggro deck, but without the drawback of running out of steam like an aggro deck, while also creating big meatballs just to flip you off. It was terrible to play against. There were only 2 ways to beat Irelia Azir. The first was to play a deck that took advantage of Irelia Azir's main properties. Since Irelia Azir was a deck that created waves of tiny tokens to throw at you, playing a deck that could take advantage of them was paramount to even standing a chance of winning. Some players used Scargrounds decks, a deck archetype that made units stronger the more damage they took. Some used dragons that could get stronger the more enemies they killed, using the blades and sand soldiers as fodder. I personally sold my soul and used an all-in Fiora deck, a deck that would automatically win if your Fiora killed 4 enemies. As for the other option, the only other choice was to go even harder on the aggro. See, Irelia Azir was not a pure aggro deck. Aggro decks are all about throwing a bunch of low-cost cards at your enemy's face and hoping you kill them before you run out of ammo. Irelia Azir used the synergy of Azir and Irelia's kits to attack like an aggro deck, but it sacrificed the speed of an aggro deck in exchange for sustainability. Irelia Azir wasn't as fast, but it could keep fighting for much longer. But for an aggro player, that's not a problem if you can kill them fast enough. And because of the overwhelming power of Irelia Azir, nearly everyone was forced into one of these 2 camps. But little did they know that this would give rise to something sinister, a second angle in the Unholy Trinity. Thresh Nasus is a deck that is sometimes touted as the counter to Irelia Azir. That isn't true. Thresh Nasus was made to counter the counters of Irelia Azir. See, Thresh Nasus relies on using its cards to get a bunch of kills in order to level Thresh, and once he's leveled up, he'll summon Nasus, who gets bigger the more cards you've killed. With the big meatball, you can then steamroll your opponent, and if your opponent tries to respond, you then use Atrocity to blast your opponent in the face with your Nasus. Because the main way of countering Irelia Azir was with aggro, Thresh Nasus could easily kill the small minions to feed their Nasus and win. And in the case of all the other unique Irelia Azir counters, well, most of those decks were always suboptimal strategies outside of the Irelia Azir matchups, so they got trounced pretty hard. In short, it sucked for everybody who didn't want to play either of those archetypes. Bah! Just play control decks. Well, unfortunately, all the control decks got destroyed by the third angle of the Unholy Trinity, the one control deck to end them all, TLC. No, that really was the deck's name. A while ago, back when Targon was released, the champion Trundle was released, and he spawned a deck referred to as Trundle Lissandra Control. You would essentially use the tools of Freljord and Shadow Isles to stay alive until you could pop off with Trundle or Ledros. However, the Shurima expansion introduced a new champion for the Freljord, Lissandra. Lissandra allowed you to summon these landmarks that would eventually become thralls, 8-cost 8/8 units with Overwhelm, and when she leveled up, she generated the Watcher. Lissandra was essentially an archetype that could cheat out big meatballs, except for one thing. The Watcher had a very special ability. If it attacked, it would destroy your opponent's deck. See, in most CCGs, your deck has a very limited number of cards, and nearly every CCG has a penalty for when you run out of cards to draw. In Legends of Runeterra, if you run out of cards, you die. Needless to say, the Watcher was very overpowered, and the only thing keeping it in line was that the only way to play it was to play 4 other 8-cost units. Except, remember how I mentioned Trundle Lissandra Control, and how it has access to the Shadow Isles? Well, there was this card in the Shadow Isles called Spectral Matron. She had been in the game since Foundations, and had always been a bad card. Her ability was to summon a copy of a card that would die after 1 turn, and that ability would be abused to great effect with the Watcher, and thus TLC was reborn as Trundle Lissandra Control, a control deck that could end games faster than any other control deck, thus killing every other control deck in the game. Legends of Runeterra sucked at that time. Every time you booted up a game, you were either stuck playing against Irelia Azir, Thresh Nasus, or TLC, all of which were overpowered as fuck and annoying to play against. In the end, the devs absolutely gutted Irelia and her archetype, leaving it worse than dead. The Watcher's ability was nerfed, now leaving 3 cards left in the enemy deck, but that was enough for players to eke out a win against TLC, and to end TLC's reign of terror for good. With Irelia Azir dead, people didn't need to play the counters to the deck, and Thresh Nasus lost its easy prey. The deck still survived though, unlike its partners in the Unholy Trinity, and it's popped up every now and then in the meta, but it's never had the same presence as it did then. The era of the Unholy Trinity had ended, but the scars remained, and I don't think the community ever recovered from the aftermath that it left. I mean, it didn't help that we were hit with Lurk decks, Vandal City decks, Pantheon decks, Kaisa decks, and Seraphine decks all in succession afterwards, but that's a story for another time. So, thanks for watching, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for future videos, and I'll see you next time.